So today we are going to be talking about the perks of being a wallflower and its depiction of PTSD. So the client we're going to be talking about is Charlie Kelmekis. Charlie is a socially awkward freshman in high school, and as we find out later in the movie, he was sexually abused by his aunt when he was a child. Shortly before the beginning of the movie, Charlie's best friend commits suicide, which further adds to his trauma. Throughout the course of the movie, he meets siblings Sam and Patrick, and through his friendship with them and their other friends, he both learns how to cope and experiences problems with his PTSD. So the diagnosis I have given is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. So now we're going to look at the diagnostic criteria for PTSD and compare it with the portrayal of Charlie in the movie. So we begin with PTSD diagnostic criteria A, which in order to have PTSD, you must have exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways: directly experiencing the traumatic event, witnessing someone else experiencing a traumatic event, learning that something has happened to a family or close friend, or experiencing repeated exposure to details of a traumatic event. Now, in the film, Charlie fulfills both 1 and 3. 1 being directly experiencing a traumatic event when he was sexually abused by his aunt throughout his childhood, and Charlie also learns of the violent suicide of his best friend. So, PTSD diagnostic criteria B. And it's the presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic event occurs. These can include recurrent, involuntary, intrusive memories of the event, recurring distressing dreams in which content reflects the event, dissociative reactions such as flashbacks in which the individual feels as if they are reliving the event, intense or prolonged psychological distress to an internal or external cues that symbolize the event or an aspect of the event, and marked physiological reactions to these cues as well. In the film, Charlie is shown to fulfill both 1 and 4, and possibly 3 of that list. For 1, Charlie is shown throughout the movie as remembering parts of his aunt's death and later sexual abuse. These memories are shown as being intrusive and causing Charlie significant distress. For 4, after being touched by the thigh on Sam, memories of the sexual abuse begin returning to Charlie, and he begins blacking out. This, of course, is a psychological response to stimuli that reminds him of the sexual abuse. And for 3, while not explicitly confirming it, the memories that Charlie is shown remembering are seen to be very vivid in detail. So now diagnostic criteria C. Diagnostic criteria C is persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event occurred. It can be avoidance or an effort to avoid distressing memories or feelings about something closely associated with the traumatic event, or it can be an avoidance or effort to avoid external reminders of the event. In the film, Charlie is shown to fulfill the first of that list and possibly the second. Charlie Charlie, in a conversation with his brother, says that whenever these memories that I have mentioned occur, he tries to block them out, which is evident of him trying to avoid psychological stresses of the event. And for 2, Charlie seems uncomfortable in sexual situations, although this just could be due to his shyness. This aversion to sexual experiences could be an attempt to distance himself from external reminders of his sexual abuse. So, for PTSD diagnostic criteria D, is a negative alteration in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the event has occurred. In order for this, you need to have evidence of 2 or more of the following: an inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event, persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, persistent disordered cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic event that lead the individual to blame himself or others, persistent negative emotional state, markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities, feelings of detachment or estrangement from others, and a persistent inability to experience positive emotions. So in the film, Charlie is shown to fulfill both 1, 2, and 3 on that list, and possibly 4 and 6. For 1, Charlie doesn't remember being sexually abused until it is triggered in the later in the movie. For the most of the movie, the guilt he feels and the trauma he remembers from the event is simply his aunt dying in a car accident when he was going to get him a present, and no memories of sexual abuse seem to be present. For number 2, Charlie has a low self-image and expresses that he sees a lot of pain in the world, which is characteristic of a low self-image and continual distress. In a conversation he remarks about a popular boy and how that boy is, quote, him, and how Charlie is, quote, just me. For number 3, Charlie believes that he is the reason his aunt dies. At the end of the movie, he blames himself for his aunt's death because it was his birthday present that she was going out to get when she died in a car accident. And later, he expresses shame because he believes that she may have died because he wanted her to die because of the sexual abuse. And for number 4, while the movie portrays Charlie as happy at times, it is possible that this is just an outward appearance, and that since we are not privy to Charlie's inner thoughts, it cannot be ruled out that he's not in a constant state or near constant state of negative emotion. For number 6, in the beginning, Charlie has trouble making friends, which could be characteristic of detachment and an inability to feel interest in activities, although this could just be a side effect of his shyness. So for PTSD diagnostic criteria E and F. Beginning with E, it is marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event occurred, and you need at least 2 or more of the following. Irritable behavior and angry outbursts, with little or no provocation, typically expressed as verbal or physical aggression towards people or others. Reckless or self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, problems with concentration, and sleep disturbance. In the film, he is shown as exhibiting number 2 on that list, and possibly number 1. For number 2, Charlie routinely throughout the movie engages in drug and alcohol use, which could be seen as self-destructive behavior. And for number 1, Charlie is shown as having gotten into a fight after when his friend is getting beat up by a group of other boys, although this is a single occurrence and it could be argued that he was provoked. Criteria F is simply that the duration of the disturbances is more than 1 month. And in the movie, Charlie is shown to have these symptoms for at least 1 year, well over 1 month. Moving on, diagnostic criteria G and H. G is that the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. And H is the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition. So for criteria G, Charlie is shown to experience significant distress from his trauma. As we see throughout the movie, he experiences breakdowns as well as negative symptoms. He also is shown, once again, to have an impairment in the ability to make friends, which would qualify as an impairment in social functioning. And for criteria H, while the drug use is shown in the movie to be a trigger for certain symptoms like dissociation, Charlie is also shown to have these symptoms before taking any drugs. So moving on, we were talking about the presentation of this disorder in the movie and how it relates to real life statistics. First of all, Charlie developed his PTSD as a child or as a teenager. And this is actually more common than some people might believe, as it is estimated that anywhere from 15 to 43% of children experience a traumatic event during their childhood. Something else that is interesting is that Charlie is a boy. And when it comes to children who experience sexual abuse or a traumatic event in their life, girls are far more likely to develop PTSD than boys are, with girls being 3 to 15% likely to develop it, and boys only being 1 to 6%. Perhaps another notable thing is that Charlie is sexually abused, and is a man who is sexually abused. And this is actually more common than people might also believe, with 1 out of every 10 men being estimated to have experienced a sexual trauma in their lifetime. And it is notable that while I took the liberty to look up everyday people's reviews of this movie and its portrayal of PTSD, and from what I could see, a majority of people with PTSD seem to view this portrayal as one that is positive. So let's talk about the context of his disorder. Charlie appears to come from a relatively privileged background. And because of this, he would be in real life less likely to develop PTSD as a result of his trauma, although since we are here, he clearly did. But this also means that he is more likely to have better access to treatment as compared to someone from a lower socioeconomic background. Charlie's family seems to be supportive after learning of his disorder and what caused his disorder, which would, of course, make him more likely to seek good treatment. Now let's talk about Charlie's friends. While Charlie's friends do offer a support system for him, it is also notable that his friends do encourage his drug use, which has been shown to lead to triggering symptoms. So his friends act as sort of a double-edged sword. So, prognosis and social inequity. Based on Charlie's support systems and his socioeconomic status, his ability to seek adequate treatment, and his family's willingness to help him through it, I would say that Charlie is likely to be successful in his treatment and of his managing of his symptoms. And I think that if Charlie had been from a lower socioeconomic background, or if his family had been less accommodating to this disorder, he likely wouldn't have had access to the treatment that he did. So, let's talk about treatments. Firstly, given Charlie's young age, I would recommend that he and his family engage in talk therapy to help them come to accept the reality of his situation and his trauma. I would also recommend therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive processing therapy to help Charlie manage his symptoms. And while the movie shows Charlie on medication, it does not show any specific medication. So I would recommend that if Charlie's symptoms do not get better in therapy, or if these medications are shown to help, I would recommend Charlie go on antidepressants like Zoloft or Prozac to help Charlie manage any symptoms of his PTSD, as well as any depressive symptoms that could present themselves. Some criticisms I have, or lack of criticisms. I think that there was a good amount of symptoms displayed in this movie. I think that they did a good job not overloading his symptoms, trying to cross off every list in the criteria, have every symptom present, because I feel like that would have made for an exaggerated caricature of what someone with PTSD has. I also like that they didn't go too under with his symptoms. I like that they didn't just focus on one individual thing, because I don't think that would have given a clear picture of what PTSD is. I think that by only going for some symptoms, it makes it a more unique and accurate portrayal of the disorder. One criticism I have, though, is that I think the movie could have gone more in depth with some symptoms. For instance, I think the movie could have done a better job depicting the vividness of the flashbacks. The flashbacks in the movie are simply shown as images cut into scenes for